Please join me in welcoming to the stage writer-director Eliza Hittman and Talia Ryder. Firstly, thank you so much for coming out and screening the film and taking the time to be with us today. I wanted to start with you, Eliza, because I read that you initially conceptualized this around a story that you read about a woman in Galway who was trying to access an abortion, and obviously until recently the laws in Ireland were different. And I was curious, given that you initially started looking at potentially telling an Irish story about two au pairs, when the shift came that it became an American story.
I guess I can say I was working on two treatments simultaneously. And initially I was thinking about the journey that women were taking from Ireland across the Irish Sea and back to London. But at the time I was making very micro-budget films, and it seemed like a stretch, and nobody was gonna finance me making a UK-based movie. And I'm very practical-minded, and it was useful for me to explore that film as a treatment, and it was a way. And then I asked myself, to think about what that journey looks like in the United States.
And this was also around the time that you were editing your feature, It Felt Like Love, and I was curious how the journey of making that film fed into your creative process for this one.
It's a little bit of a long time ago, if I'm being honest. I had made a coming-of-age film, but I had never really made a road movie. And so I was just thinking about the layers with which I could explore this story, one being, a film about female friendship, one being a film about, the real life barriers that women face in getting legal abortions and what that odyssey looks like, and just thinking about the sort of dimensions of the story and the potential that it had, and to do new things as a filmmaker, to explore new things as a filmmaker.
And for you, Talia, I was interested in the ways, because it feels like it's a very authentic journey for both young female characters. And I was curious, what were the aspects of Skylar that you found just to speak very authentically to that experience of being a young woman at that age?
Yeah, I feel like as a young woman, I'm very protective over my female friends, and I have a younger sister as well. And the women supporting women is something that people appreciate more nowadays, and Eliza does a beautiful job of depicting it in this film.
Do you remember kind of the tone in the room when you first came into the audition room, and what scene it was that you read?
I remember doing the bathroom scene where I ask if Autumn's okay, and then we also, on the screen test, Eliza took us around and we went on the subway and walked around Brooklyn a little and did some of the scenes out there.
And we had the suitcase with us.
Yeah.
Why was that such an important thing?
The suitcase was also being auditioned.
Was it the first choice suitcase?
Yeah, we were testing it. Yeah.
Why was that so important for you in the casting process? Because I think that's so wonderful that you took the two of them around the city and really did those screen tests as part of the process.
I think it was important to try, and I think it's important as a director to see the audition process as an active process and not a passive one. And I don't like sitting in an audition room, in a chair with a casting director and producers, and, putting the actor, at a distance. And I believe it's like an opportunity to really work with somebody and to try and stage scenes from the film, as they're going to be staged in the movie, and not just like pointing a static camera at them in a little jail cell of an audition room. And there's something to me about that environment that feels sort of humiliating for an actor. And I think that in giving people active scenarios, like let's go in the bathroom, Talia, Sidney's in the toilet, and Talia, you're outside, you just get more of a feeling for what it's like to work with somebody and what the energy of the scene is going to be like, what the connection is between the two.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've done process-wise on all of your projects, or at what point did you develop that?
I did it on everything, with Beach Rats. I auditioned guys on a handball court, just to get a sense of their physicality and their energy, and they weren't actors, so to bring them into, again, this artificial room, just didn't feel like an effective strategy for me. Yeah, I don't know.
And in general, because you don't always do traditional casting processes either, what was your process in terms of working with Geraldine and Salome, who were your casting directors on this film?
It's interesting. On Beach Rats, I worked with a quite established casting director, and it was a process that had challenges, and I felt like I had kind of slighted her in not choosing people she wanted me to cast. And it was a weird feeling for me to feel like I was crossing somebody in making my own independent decisions about who I wanted to cast in the movie. So I wanted to work with sort of casting directors who had a different approach. And Geraldine and Salome, had been doing more non-traditional casting, and they were really ready to get their hands dirty. And that was what I needed on this film. So they went out into a lot of communities and tried to bring in people, and also did a traditional search.
One of the things I loved about the process that you went through with Sidney Talia was that Eliza giving you journals that you both wrote answers to very personal questions, and then you shared it, just the two of you, not even having Eliza in the room. And how did that really help the two of you find the core of their relationship and friendship beyond just being siblings with each other?
Yeah, well, the prompts were pretty personal, and we spent, I think, like over an hour just talking through them together. And obviously, like, those answers led to other conversations. And once you know like that much about a person, it's really hard not to form a connection with them.
And I also know that when you and Sidney both first met, that you realized that you were from the same town.
Yeah.
So did you have a lot of conversations just outside of those very personal questions as well, just to build an overall bond?
Yeah, I mean, being from the same hometown is like a huge connection to someone, because you know the same things, you're from like that same culture, and yeah, that definitely helped.
And why did you know it was an important step for you not to even be in the room? You never read these journals, you don't know what they wrote and what they shared with each other, because I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I wanted them to have a secret history with each other. I didn't go into their character backstories. What I thought was more important was for them to try and get to know their own histories, to create a connection that you experience on screen. And I didn't want it to be artificial, or for me to try and write it, the history of Talia's character, and it was more important, for them to bond as young women in the world.
Yeah. Are there other exercises that you've worked with actors on previously in other projects that would be kind of in a similar line to this outside of the traditional rehearsal process?
No, I mean, you're always kind of winging it and trying to think about what's best for the project that you're doing in that moment. I don't have like a process, of working with people. It's always different. People come with different experience and different backgrounds. Like, Talia had done a Broadway show. I have no idea what it's like to act in a Broadway show, and sing and dance and act at the same time, and to do it as a 12-year-old. I mean, that's astonishing. It's beyond my experience. And Sidney, went to a performing arts high school in Buffalo, and, has a lot of passion for music and playing music. And it's like, you just can't work with those two people the same way. There's no one way to direct a movie and to direct actors.
What were some of the most valuable things for you, Talia, that Eliza did in terms of helping you find your character and helping you find your performance along the way?
Well, one of the things that we did in the rehearsal process, in addition to the journals, we read through the script, and Eliza answered questions that we had about certain moments. But what I really liked that Eliza had us do, Sidney actually picked the songs in the films that she sang, and I was kind of there and got to watch that happen, and I got to listen to Sidney sing, and like watching her like express her passion for music and see that, and I'm like passionate about dance, and just that really helped, and I felt like, I don't know.
Yeah, we also in this like short period of time that we had to rehearse, I also had Talia put makeup We had just kind of all sat on my bed, actually, and Talia put makeup on Sidney, and they rehearsed the scene in a very intimate and quiet way. And for me, it was about kind of calibrating the tone and the intimacy with the camera and helping them understand that in a subtle way, that, there's a difference between how you perform on stage than when the camera is so close to you. And in a way, it was about just kind of adjusting the type of performance and just sitting, me with an iPhone and Talia putting makeup on Sidney and just, and I, just made little videos with them kind of hanging out and spending time together.
Yeah. So in addition to what Eliza was just talking about for you, what were some of the biggest kind of technical and logistical learning curves coming into this from a theater background, but this being your first narrative feature?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're really different. I remember a couple times, like the scene that we did on the bus with Theo, Eliza was like, "It's too warm." Like you're like, it's just a different type of thought process you need to have when approaching those kind of scenes. And I felt like definitely towards the end of shooting, like I got the hang of it.
Yeah, with that scene in particular, I think it was easy to sort of let it become too flirtatious, and it was about her kind of keeping her guard and her distance, and he's so nice as an actor, it was hard not to warm up to him too quickly.
One of the beautiful things about your performance as well is the way that there's so much unspoken in this film, and yet there's so much in all of the performances. So I was interested how the two of you worked together to kind of flesh out those gaps and find those moments.
I think the first step was a little bit on the page, and because the story really is like a hero's journey, and it's focused on Sidney's character's journey going through this difficult process. I didn't want Talia's character to be lost, and really I forced myself to think about what it was like to be on the journey and simultaneously shut out. And I went back and I just kind of made sure that what she was feeling was gently sculpted onto the page, so it wouldn't be lost, and it, I think, there were a lot of like really talented actors who initially auditioned for Autumn, and everybody auditioned for Autumn, and then we went back through and we were like, who would make an interesting interesting Skylar? And there were a lot of young women who only wanted to be considered for the like quote leading role, and it sort of baffled me that they didn't seem to connect to, what Skylar was doing on the journey in a way. Yeah. And I think that when Talia came in and read for the role and talked about it, she had a crystal clear understanding of the character and the arc, and it was so subtly written on the page that I was it was really, really refreshing, to hear someone's perspective on this character that I took a lot of time to write and that other actors felt wasn't central enough.
And with you, Talia, because so much of, as Eliza was saying, your character's experience is really influenced by what Autumn's going through. So did you find yourself, when you were shooting scenes with Sidney, looking to her performance as a guidance for where your character would be at in that moment?
Yeah, well, totally. I mean, there's a couple times in New York where my character begins to get upset because she's getting so shut out, and after she feels that she's giving up so much for Autumn to not really receive anything back, gets frustrating to her. But at the end of the day, her love for Autumn ends up trumping that frustration, and she still does everything in her power to save Autumn, which I respect a lot.
And I know that obviously people have been responding very much to the central theme of the film, but also through your character, we really get the eyes of a young woman on the receiving end of toxic masculinity. Like all of the men are overly sexualizing her, behaving inappropriately with her. Have you had a lot of women respond to that? Because it feels like something that everyone can relate to.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my friends specifically that are other teenagers are like, wow, I'm glad this is finally being addressed, and because it's something that's so normalized everywhere. And it's the small moments that we don't really talk about. Like you see just even in the grocery store, or that moment on the bus where Jasper just touches her and breaks that like space bubble. People don't talk about that enough, and I'm glad that Eliza addressed it in the way she did.
One of the other scenes, which is obviously really provoking, is the one where Autumn's attempting to self-abort early on. How did you work with Sidney on that scene and in preparing her for that and finding the right tone for it?
You know, I think that it was a challenging role. And it required somebody who was very vulnerable, and Sidney is very vulnerable. And, you know, to stage that scene, we did get a stunt person, you know, to supervise it, because I obviously, I don't know, didn't want her to hurt herself, and nor did the producers. And I think she was anxious about how far I wanted it to go. And the stunt coordinator person, it was like something that kind of slipped through the cracks, and then miraculously we were able to find someone on the day of. And he was really encouraging and helpful, and he understood. I was surprised at how well he understood, you know, what she was doing and going through, and the determination of it and the sort of pain of it. And I have to say that was a key element to staging that scene. Was the guidance, the careful guidance of a stunt coordinator, who seemed to understand the tone of the film and the character very well. And, you know, Sidney is one of those brave actors who was willing, you know, to go to dark places. And when I said, you know, swallow a bottle of these fake vitamin C pills, she was okay, you know, and she, you know, her reaction is real. I mean, it was nauseating to have to keep shoving those down her throat. And, you know, and she knew that I really wanted to pull the audience into this sort of dark space with the character.
One of the other scenes, which obviously feels incredibly authentic, is when she's actually at the doctor's surgery going in for the procedure. How much was Kelly Chapman, who plays the social worker in that scene, valuable in not just figuring out the details, but also what the environment and what the tone of that room would be as well?
You know, Kelly Chapman, who plays a social worker, is a social worker who I consulted with throughout the process of making the film, and specifically that pivotal scene. And I put a lot of work into workshopping that on the page. And she was also on set, which was useful. And while we were staging things with the procedure, you know, I'd ask her, like, where would the anesthesiologist be? Where would the nurse be? Where would this person be? Like, how would this room be organized in terms of people? And she gave a lot of feedback on things, and, you know, what would the financial counselor do, and where would she pay? And she just kind of helped me visualize, you know, even if we don't show all those things on screen, because it's not a documentary, we don't have time to include everything, and we're just trying to see what's essential to this specific story. She was a tremendous asset on set and in development.
What was the point at which you discovered that questionnaire where they do ask the never, rarely, sometimes, always, because it's such a powerful moment in the film?
I don't, and, you know, to be honest, I don't remember who exactly I was talking to, but I had a phone call with someone from Planned Parenthood, and I had a bunch of follow-up questions, and, you know, I went through the intake form. And it's a part of the form that's called intimate partner violence, and it's not a test and it's not a questionnaire, really. It's on the form, but it's meant to open up a conversation about safe relationships and to try and assess whether there's consent involved in the pregnancy. And yeah, I discovered it kind of organically in the writing process, and it, you know, wasn't, you know, I didn't have an outline for the film. I was kind of, you know, finding the story as I went in the writing and researching and getting on buses and looking out the window and, you know, writing. And yeah, it kind of came to me somewhere in the process. I don't remember exactly where.
And when you were shooting that scene, I also read that you kept Sidney and Kelly apart prior to filming.
I quarantined Sidney.
Why was that such an important choice for you to make with the two of them?
I think in making an independent film, when you make like a studio film, your actors all have trailers and there's a space to go into to sort of quietly prepare. And that doesn't exist on an indie film. And an indie film can be a bit like working on a construction site. And for that day, I was insistent that she have a private space to just get ready. And I remember going into the room and just going through the scene with her a couple times before we were going to shoot. And I didn't, direct her. I just said that, I felt, the key to the scene was to personalize the answers as much as possible. And some things she's answering as herself, like about her family medical history. And is there any history of heart disease? Don't think so. She's going through her own history in a lot of the questions.
Yeah. And also the way that you filmed it, I believe you had 2 cameras for that one, and it's a lot of extreme close-ups, which feels like it works. So how did you land on that as the artistic choice?
From the beginning with my DP, we talked about doing it as 2 cameras, with 2 cameras in a long take, and one is frontal and one is 3/4 profile. And they're very close to her, so she was a bit trapped. And it was another thing that intensified the scene, and we shot on 16 millimeter. And that's a little different than shooting digitally. With digitally, you can just delete, and start again. And here, you turn the camera on, you hear the film going through the camera, and it's a little bit, of an intensifier. It's like you can hear the sand going through the hourglass.
And kind of going back to the relationship between Autumn and Skylar, one of my favorite scenes in the film between the 2 of you is the moment where you're behind the pillar and you're both holding hands across it. But there's so many little details like that both of you come up with throughout the film. Yeah. Would the 2 of you have conversations to try and figure out what you thought those moments would be with each other?
No, I mean, the pinky thing was written in, but I feel like a lot of the little nuances and things that happen were just natural for the most part.
Yeah. And would you think very much and pay much attention to where the camera was going to be, or did Eliza kind of just create an environment where you were just focusing more on the performance?
I mean, we were in a tight space when they were like setting up shots, obviously, so we could see where the cameras would be and where that was going, but I don't think from like an acting standpoint I thought too much about where the camera was in the scene.
Were there any challenges? Because you're shooting a lot of films, a lot of scenes in Midtown in New York, which is obviously incredibly crowded. And as we know, people stop and stare and shout things while you're shooting. Was there anything that you kind of found or did for yourself to keep that focus and maintain on the scene and not get distracted by any of that?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing as like when you're walking down the street in the city. Like if someone's screaming or staring, you just gotta keep doing what you're doing. And I mean, like, also if someone were to do something that were to catch my attention, it would probably catch Skylar's attention too, because it was like a foreign place to her. So the external, like, I don't know, things in the world weren't much of a challenge to deal with.
Yeah. And given that you did film on 16 millimeter, which I think is a beautiful shot choice cinematically, but that must have made a lot of the getting the shots on the fly in the middle of the city much more challenging. So why was it so important for you to do that?
Yeah, to be honest, shooting in the city, like on the subway stuff, all that stuff is very challenging. And I don't know if it's, was so easy for my DP, but she's a very confident operator and decisive. So there's not a lot of like her moving around. She knows how to kind of anticipate action very intuitively and is very in touch with the performances. Knew the story so well. There's no roughness, even though some things are handheld. It's not entirely handheld, but where it is, it's decisive. Sorry, what else did you ask? Why did I make the decision? I love 16 millimeter, and I don't know, I do think that there's sort of a ubiquitousness to a lot of the digital cameras now, in terms of the feeling. And I'm always writing about sort of worlds that are stagnant and kind of stuck in time. So I like that feeling.
And in terms of the research that you did, Talia, did you feel a need that for your character that you needed to really have an understanding of what the entire process was, what the emotional journey of trying to access an abortion and all of those logistics? Or did you feel like for your character you didn't necessarily need that?
Well, I mean, going into the film, I wanted to make sure I was well read on the topic, but I had actually done a project a year before in school on accessing abortion in the United States, so I knew a lot about it going into it.
Yeah. And were there any elements about your character with Skylar that you kind of discovered about her and learned about her and evolved as you were on set playing her that maybe you hadn't initially thought of when you read the script?
Well, when I originally read the script, what I really, really loved about Skylar was her understanding of the world, how she, throughout the story, kind of realized the power that male gaze gave her. And what was interesting when filming it, it was a more interesting, and there were different details that I noticed in that journey when we were kind of filming it.
And through both of these characters and the film in general, like you've created a film that really touches on a personal note and that people really connect to in a very unique way. Was that something that you thought about when you were writing the film, that you set out to do it all, or was that just a byproduct of what you created?
I don't know. I just, I was really compelled by the physical journey that women take to access reproductive care. And I just thought I hadn't seen that before. And I thought it was a harrowing and compelling journey.
Yeah. I wanted to jump into a couple of questions that we got from the audience. This first one is from Kiara, who's asking for you, Talia, what was the most challenging day on set like? And if it was scene related, how did you prepare for this?
Probably one of the days at Port Authority, because we had to shoot there from midnight to 4 a.m. So it was quite late. I remember one scene we did, it was before Theo and I walk off when we're with the suitcase. I remember in one of the takes I could see my mom like behind a pillar, and it was like what? It was seeing the two worlds was weird. But it was fine.
And for you, Eliza, what were some of the biggest limitations or obstacles that you had to overcome in making the film?
I'm somebody that really believes in casting characters that are true to age. And the battle of, working with a minor was really, complicated. And yeah, that was, I was happy we cast Talia, and I think that her youthfulness, is a compliment to Sidney's kind of dark interior, and that was what we were looking for. And Sidney's a little bit older, and she's over 18. She was 19 when we shot. I couldn't have shot the movie with two minors. It would have been impossible. It would have been impossible.
And for both of you, what was the biggest thing that you learned about your craft from the process of making the film?
That's tough.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still, I don't think that there's, to be honest, it's never perfect and it's never easy, the process. And I've learned right after we finished the shoot, I wrote out a long document of things that were challenging. And the next time I go to make a movie, I'm going to go back and read it just to remind myself, just to try and get ahead of certain things. And I don't know, they're always very unpredictable experiences, and there's lots of human error in the process and the planning. And I don't know, it's never easy, but it's also a privilege. And you learn so much every time you do it, and yet the next movie is its own beast.
And given that the film has connected so wholeheartedly with people since it premiered at Sundance and at every step along the way, what have been some of the really touching responses, and what has it meant to you to have women coming up and sharing their stories with both of you in response to the film?
And men. Yeah, when I was in Park City, Utah, in Salt Lake, a man came up to me and told me a very heart-wrenching story about his sister who had to make a very difficult choice, you know, based on some health issues she was having. And she was, what's the word? She was, you know, became estranged from her family because they didn't support her decision. And it ended her relationship with their parents. I don't know, you know, I think that there's always, you know, a lot of people who like want to come up and share their personal stories. And I don't know, I think it's very touching.
Yeah. Has that been the same for you as well, Talia?
Yeah, a mom came up to me in Sundance and told me that after she left the theater, she was going to go call her daughter because of the scene that happened with Sydney in the bowling alley. And that was a really nice response, like seeing that people are coming out of the theater with more of a better perspective on female relationships.
Well, it's not just a beautifully made film, it also feels like such an important film, especially right now. The film is coming out on March 13th, so please tell all your friends and family to go see it. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon, and thank you to all of you.